The airport was busy, as it always was on a Friday morning. Families hurried to their gates, business travelers rushed past with briefcases, and the sound of rolling suitcases echoed through the terminal. Among all the travelers, a young black girl walked with a careful pace, holding the hand of her little brother. Her backpack was slightly heavy on her shoulders, filled with a few books, a tablet, and a small bag of snacks for the journey. She felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. It was her first long flight alone with her brother, and although she was looking forward to visiting her cousins, the thought of being away from her parents for the duration made her stomach tighten. As she approached the check-in counter, she could feel the usual airport buzz pressing around her. People were talking loudly. Announcements played over the speakers and luggage clattered across the floor. The girl kept her eyes forward, trying not to get distracted while making sure her brother stayed close. She handed over their tickets to the airline staff and asked politely if they could sit together on the plane. The clerk smiled briefly and nodded, handing back their boarding passes. With tickets in hand, the girl guided her brother through security. They removed their shoes, placed their bags on the conveyor belt, and walked carefully through the metal detector. Everything went smoothly, and she felt a small wave of relief as they collected their belongings on the other side. She held her brother's hand again, scanning the terminal for the correct gate. The flight was scheduled to depart in about 45 minutes, and she wanted to make sure they had enough time to reach it without rushing. As they approached the gate, the girl noticed the flight attendant on duty. She was a tall woman in her mid-30s, dressed neatly in the airline uniform, standing near the boarding counter and checking boarding passes. The girl approached with her brother, smiling politely. "Good morning," she said, her voice calm but polite. "We're here for the flight to Chicago, and we just want to make sure we can sit together." The flight attendant looked up and glanced at the tickets. There was a slight pause before she spoke, her tone neutral but firm. "Everything looks fine," she said. "Please have your boarding passes ready." The girl nodded and moved a little closer, holding her brother's hand. She asked a few simple questions about where to store their carry-on and how to buckle the seatbelt, making sure she had remembered all the safety instructions from the airline pamphlet. At first, it seemed like the interaction was normal, but then the flight attendant's expression shifted. She frowned slightly, and there was a tension in her posture. The girl didn't notice it at first, but she felt it instinctively. A small prickling feeling in her chest that something was off. She continued to ask her questions politely, not understanding why the attendant was growing irritated. The attendant's eyes narrowed and she muttered under her breath, though not loudly enough for anyone else to hear. When the girl asked again about overhead bin space, trying to make sure their bags would fit safely, the attendant's tone became sharper. "I already told you," she said. "Everything is fine. Please proceed to your seats." The girl, trying to remain calm, apologized for bothering her and thanked her before walking toward the plane. Her brother stayed close, holding her hand tightly. As they walked down the jetway, the girl noticed the flight attendant whispering to another staff member, pointing in their direction. She couldn't hear the words, but she saw the urgency in their gestures. The girl felt her heart start to beat faster. Something was happening, but she didn't know what. She walked onto the plane and found their seats, helping her brother stow their bags above them. She tried to focus on the small comfort of being seated together, buckling their seatbelts, and looking out the window at the planes on the tarmac. Before she could settle in, the flight attendant returned to their row. She leaned slightly over them and asked a question, but the girl couldn't quite hear it over the sound of the other passengers boarding. The attendant's face was tight and her eyes flicked around as if searching for something. The girl smiled politely and answered, thinking she was just trying to be helpful. But the attendant didn't smile back. Instead, she walked away, picked up a phone behind the counter and spoke quickly, gesturing toward the girl and her brother. The girl didn't understand at first, but a moment later, she overheard the words, "suspicious behavior," and "call the police." Her stomach dropped. She looked around at the other passengers boarding the plane. Some were still talking, some were finding their seats, and some had noticed the tension building. A few glanced curiously in their direction, sensing that something unusual was happening, though no one knew exactly what. She tried to remain calm, holding her brother's hand tightly. She leaned closer to him and whispered, "It's okay, don't worry. We're fine." But inside she felt a storm of fear. How could this be happening? They had done nothing wrong. They had followed all the rules, been polite, and just wanted to board the plane safely. Her heart raced as she tried to understand why the flight attendant would make such a call. Other passengers began to notice. Some whispered to each other, glancing at the girl and her brother. A woman in the row behind them shook her head slightly, muttering, "This isn't right." A man a few seats away started recording on his phone, sensing that the situation was unfair. The girl kept her head down, hoping that whatever was coming wouldn't escalate further. She whispered to herself, "Just stay calm. Everything will be okay." Within minutes, airport security arrived. 2 officers in uniform approached, speaking in a professional tone but with a sense of caution. The girl stood up slowly, holding her brother's hand, and tried to explain. "We haven't done anything wrong," she said. "We're just here to take our flight." Her voice was calm, but it trembled slightly from fear. The officers looked at each other, then at the flight attendant, who was pointing toward them and speaking quickly into her phone. The officers began asking questions, trying to understand the situation. The girl answered politely, giving her full name, explaining where she was traveling, and reassuring them that she had her tickets and identification. She stayed calm, even though her hands were shaking slightly. Her brother clung to her side, looking up at her with wide eyes, sensing her anxiety. She patted his hand gently and whispered, "It's okay, we're okay." Passengers around them were watching closely. Some were confused, some were concerned, and some had started recording. The girl noticed the murmurs spreading through the cabin. "Why is this happening?" One passenger whispered to another. "They didn't do anything," another said, shaking his head. The girl felt a small sense of relief knowing that people could see what was happening, that she wasn't invisible in this moment. Despite her calm words, the situation continued to escalate. The flight attendant's insistence grew stronger, and she spoke loudly into her phone again, emphasizing that the girl's behavior was suspicious and that the police needed to handle it immediately. The girl could feel the weight of every eye on her, every judgment unspoken but palpable. She tried not to look at the other passengers too much, focusing instead on breathing slowly and holding her brother close. Her parents arrived moments later, rushing toward the gate after being called by airline staff. Their faces were a mix of shock, anger, and concern. They knelt next to their daughter and son, trying to calm them both and reassure them. The girl's father spoke to the officers, explaining who she was and confirming their travel plans. The mother held her daughter's shoulders and whispered, "It's going to be okay, we're here now." Even with her parents there, the girl felt a tight knot in her chest. She kept answering questions politely, trying to remain calm while the officers reviewed her identification and tickets. She noticed some passengers continuing to record the situation, while others whispered words of support. "She's just a kid," one woman said. "There's no reason for this." Minutes felt like hours. The girl and her brother stayed seated, holding hands, listening to the murmurs around them. Her parents tried to explain calmly to the officers, but the flight attendant continued to insist that something was wrong. The girl felt a mix of frustration and fear. All she wanted was to get on the plane, take off, and enjoy the trip with her family. Instead, she was at the center of a situation that seemed completely out of control. Finally, one officer leaned closer to her, speaking quietly. "We just need to make sure everything is okay," he said. The girl nodded, appreciating his calm tone. She answered every question honestly, explaining their travel plans, her school schedule, and her relationship with her brother. She did her best to remain composed, even as her chest tightened and her stomach churned with nerves. Other passengers continued to watch. Some whispered words of support, some shook their heads, and some kept recording. The girl felt a strange mix of embarrassment and relief. Embarrassment that so many people were witnessing an unfair accusation, and relief that the truth of her innocence was becoming clear to those paying attention. She focused on her brother, squeezing his hand gently. "It's okay," she whispered again. "We'll be fine." The tension in the cabin was thick, but the girl's calmness helped diffuse some of it. She answered every question carefully, politely, and honestly. She reminded herself that she had done nothing wrong. This was not her fault. The officers continued to stand near the girl and her family, speaking quietly among themselves. The girl could see the seriousness on their faces, but she remained calm, holding her brother's hand tightly. She knew that if she panicked now, it might make the situation worse. Every few seconds, she glanced at the flight attendant, who stood at a distance, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. The woman seemed determined to prove that the girl had done something wrong, even though the girl had done nothing at all. Passengers were still whispering to one another, some showing obvious sympathy. A woman a few rows behind leaned forward and said quietly, "This is not right. She hasn't done anything." A man holding his phone whispered to his wife, "It's unbelievable that something like this is happening over a simple misunderstanding." The girl could hear the murmurs, and although it made her nervous to know that so many people were watching, it also gave her a strange sense of support. She realized that she was not alone, even if the situation felt isolating. The police officer who had been speaking with her stepped aside to talk to his partner. They were discussing what to do next, and the girl could catch fragments of their conversation. Words like unnecessary and misunderstanding were mentioned, but the tone was still cautious. She understood that the officers were trying to follow protocol, but she also felt frustrated. She had answered every question politely and honestly, yet here she was treated like a problem instead of a passenger. Her parents stayed close, gently placing their hands on her shoulders. "Just stay calm," her father whispered. "We're here and we'll make sure this is cleared up." Her mother squeezed her hand. "Remember, you have done nothing wrong. Don't let anyone make you feel afraid." The girl nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. She wanted to believe them, but the tension in the air made it difficult. Suddenly, the flight attendant walked closer again, speaking louder this time. "I need you to remain here until the police finish questioning," she said, glancing at the officers. The girl's heart sank. It felt as if the entire plane was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. She tried not to react outwardly, keeping her expression calm. But inside, a storm of emotions swirled: fear, frustration, and a growing sense of helplessness. Some passengers began to speak up. A young man sitting a few rows away stood and said loudly, "She hasn't done anything. You're treating a kid like a criminal for no reason." Others nodded in agreement, and a few more people recorded short videos on their phones. The murmurs grew louder, and the atmosphere in the cabin shifted slightly. It was no longer just an interaction between the girl, her family, and the flight attendant. Now everyone on the plane seemed to feel the weight of the unfairness. The girl felt a small spark of relief. She realized that people noticing the injustice gave her a bit of protection. She squeezed her brother's hand and whispered, "See? People know what's happening. Don't worry." Her brother's eyes were wide, but he nodded slowly, trusting her words. He had always looked up to her, and she knew he was scared. She wanted to show him that staying calm and polite, even in a tense situation, was powerful. The officers called the girl's parents over to speak privately. Her father followed them while her mother stayed behind with the children. They discussed quietly, out of earshot, and the girl strained to hear any information that might help. After a few moments, her father returned, his face serious but calmer than before. "They're going to review the security footage," he said. "They want to make sure everything is understood before taking further action." The girl nodded, relieved that the situation might be clearing up, but she remained cautious. She knew that even with evidence, people could make mistakes. She kept her posture straight, her hands folded in her lap, and answered any questions the officers asked with honesty. She described their travel plans, the reason for the trip, and even details about her school schedule. She wanted to show that there was nothing suspicious about her or her brother. Meanwhile, some passengers approached her and her family, offering quiet words of support. A woman leaned down and said, "Don't let them make you feel scared. You're doing everything right." Another passenger said, "I saw what happened. You haven't done anything wrong. Keep calm." The girl felt a small smile tug at her lips. The kindness of strangers gave her strength. Even in a moment of fear, she realized that there were people who recognized fairness and justice. Time seemed to slow down as the officers reviewed the footage. The girl could see them watching the security monitors, their expressions thoughtful. The flight attendant hovered nearby, still insistent but slightly less confident now that others were watching and recording. The girl held her brother's hand tighter, whispering reassurance to him. She tried not to focus on the fear anymore and instead reminded herself to stay composed. Suddenly, one of the officers looked at the flight attendant and shook his head. "I need to see the full story here," he said firmly. "We can't act on assumptions. Let's check everything before making any decisions." The attendant frowned but stepped back, realizing that her initial complaint was not enough to escalate the situation. The girl felt a wave of relief. She had stayed calm, answered all questions honestly, And now the truth was starting to show. The atmosphere in the plane shifted even more as passengers continued to whisper and record. Some were speaking directly to the girl's family, expressing disbelief at what had happened. "I can't believe someone would call the police on a young girl for nothing," one woman said. "This is ridiculous." The girl felt a strange mix of embarrassment and pride. Embarrassment because the situation was happening in public, and pride because she had handled herself with grace under pressure. Her brother leaned closer and whispered, "I'm scared." She hugged him tightly, whispering, "I know, but we're okay. We're safe. Just stay calm with me." He nodded, clinging to her arm. The girl felt a protective wave of responsibility wash over her. She realized that she had to stay strong, not just for herself, but for him too. Her courage became more than her own. It was for the little boy who looked up to her. As the officers continued their review, the girl's parents explained to nearby passengers what had happened. They emphasized that it was a misunderstanding, that their daughter had done nothing wrong, and that the police were now reviewing everything carefully. Passengers seemed to absorb the information, nodding and murmuring in support. The tension in the cabin was still present, but it was less oppressive than before. People were beginning to understand the truth. After what felt like an eternity, one officer spoke clearly to the girl and her parents. "We've reviewed the footage and listened to witnesses. Everything indicates that there was no wrongdoing. You are free to continue your journey." Relief washed over the girl in a powerful physical way. Her chest, which had felt tight for so long, loosened, and she could finally breathe without holding back. She looked at her brother and smiled gently. "See? We're okay now." Passengers around them began clapping softly, some standing up to express support. Others offered words of encouragement. The girl felt a mixture of gratitude and pride. She had stayed calm, answered honestly, and kept her brother safe. Now she could see that her patience and composure had made a difference. The flight attendant, meanwhile, looked uncomfortable, aware that her actions had caused unnecessary fear and tension. Her parents hugged her tightly, whispering words of comfort. "You were amazing," her mother said. "I'm so proud of you," her father added. "You stayed calm when it mattered most. That's something not everyone can do." The girl felt a warmth spread through her chest. She realized that staying composed, even under unfair treatment, had protected her family and helped others see the truth. As the plane prepared to depart, the girl noticed that many passengers who had witnessed the situation were smiling at her. Some waved or gave thumbs-up signs. She felt a strange mix of relief and empowerment. The incident had been frightening, but it had also shown her that fairness and truth could prevail when people were honest, calm, and courageous. Before takeoff, she took a deep breath and looked out the window. The planes on the tarmac glimmered in the sunlight, and she imagined the journey ahead. She knew that the trip would be filled with excitement, fun, and new experiences. But she also understood that this moment, this confrontation, would remain with her as a reminder of resilience, courage, and the importance of standing firm even in difficult situations. As the plane began to taxi down the runway, the girl held her brother's hand tightly. "We did it," she whispered. He looked up at her with wide eyes and nodded. They were safe. They were together. And despite the fear and tension, they had handled the situation with honesty, grace, and courage. Passengers settled into their seats. The flight attendants moved about the cabin, and the engines roared to life. The girl felt her heart begin to calm completely. She looked around at the people who had witnessed the incident and felt a sense of quiet pride. She had faced a difficult situation and emerged stronger, and as the plane lifted into the sky, she realized that she had learned a valuable lesson, one about patience, honesty, and standing strong even when unfairly judged. After the incident at the airport, the girl and her family finally made it to their seats on the plane. Her chest still felt tight from the earlier tension, but she tried to focus on the journey ahead. Her brother leaned against her shoulder, finally starting to relax. She whispered a small joke to him, and he giggled softly, the sound washing away some of the fear that had gripped them both. But even as they tried to enjoy the moment, they knew that the events in the terminal would not stay quiet for long. Within hours, videos taken by passengers began appearing online, clips showing the flight attendant speaking firmly, officers questioning the girl, and the anxious expressions of the young siblings were being shared on social media. The girl's family had not intended for this moment to become public, but they soon realized that the incident had captured widespread attention. People from across the city and beyond were commenting, sharing their opinions and expressing concern over what had happened. The girl's phone buzzed constantly with notifications. Messages of support poured in from friends and distant relatives. "I can't believe this happened to you," one message read. Another said, "You stayed so calm. I'm proud of you." The girl read each one slowly, her heart warming at the encouragement. At the same time, she felt nervous about being thrust into the public eye. She had never expected an ordinary trip to turn into something so intense. News outlets soon picked up the story. Reporters reached out to the family wanting interviews and statements. Headlines questioned why the police had been called, and many news segments highlighted the role of racial bias in similar incidents. The girl's parents debated whether to speak publicly, worried about how it might affect her and her younger brother. But they also recognized the opportunity to share the truth and help prevent similar situations from happening to others. The family decided to cooperate, but they approached it cautiously. When reporters arrived at their hotel, the girl sat quietly with her brother beside her while her parents spoke. They explained exactly what had happened, emphasizing that the girl had done nothing wrong and had only been polite and careful throughout the entire encounter. The girl listened quietly, occasionally nodding, and realized that her calm and honest behavior had become the focus of admiration in the community. Meanwhile, the airline came under scrutiny. Social media users criticized the flight attendant's decision to call the police, pointing out that a simple misunderstanding had been blown out of proportion. Hashtags supporting the girl began trending, and people shared their own experiences of being treated unfairly while traveling. The story became not just about one flight, but about broader issues of fairness, bias, and how young people, especially Black children, can be unfairly judged. The girl felt a mix of emotions. On one hand, she was proud that her story was being told. On the other hand, it was strange and uncomfortable to see so many people discussing an event that had made her feel scared and vulnerable. She kept reassuring her brother that it was okay, that they were safe, and that the attention was a chance to make something positive come out of a frightening experience. He held her hand tightly and looked up at her, trusting her guidance completely. As the family shared their story, many people began to connect with the girl's experience. Parents spoke about their own fears of discrimination affecting their children. Students wrote about feeling nervous in public spaces, fearing that people might judge them unfairly. Activists and community leaders highlighted the importance of addressing racial profiling, and the airline faced questions about their staff training and response protocols. The girl's story became a starting point for important conversations. Despite the positive attention, the girl struggled with the emotional weight of the incident. She replayed the airport scene in her mind, the tense expressions, the whispered words of the flight attendant, the officer's questioning. Even though the officers had cleared her of any wrongdoing, she felt the lingering stress of being treated as if she were suspicious. Her parents noticed her quiet moments and encouraged her to talk about her feelings. "It's okay to feel upset," her mother said. "What happened wasn't fair, and it's normal to feel hurt." The girl also found comfort in the people who had witnessed the event firsthand. Passengers who had recorded videos sent messages expressing support, and some even offered to testify if needed. Knowing that strangers had noticed the injustice and had been willing to stand by her gave the girl a sense of validation. It reminded her that fairness and honesty could inspire others to act, and that courage could take many forms. The airline responded publicly as well. They issued a statement expressing regret over the incident and promising to review their procedures to prevent similar situations in the future. They acknowledged the public outcry and emphasized their commitment to fairness and safety for all passengers. The flight attendant's actions were described as under review, and many viewers praised the airline for taking responsibility, though some felt the apology was too late or insufficient. Meanwhile, the girl began receiving invitations to speak at local schools and community events. Her parents initially hesitated, wanting her to have time to process everything, but she felt a sense of responsibility. Sharing her experience could help others understand the impact of unfair treatment and encourage them to stay calm and confident when facing similar challenges. The girl realized that she had turned a difficult and frightening situation into an opportunity to educate and inspire others. In the midst of this attention, The girl also had to navigate her own feelings of vulnerability. Seeing videos of herself circulating online was strange and sometimes uncomfortable. Some people were supportive, but others were critical or judgmental. Her parents guided her through this, reminding her that the story was about justice and awareness, not personal attacks. She focused on the messages of support, finding strength in knowing that her actions had been brave and honest. The situation drew attention from civil rights organizations as well. They reached out to offer support, highlighting the importance of raising awareness about racial profiling and bias. They used her story as an example in articles and seminars, emphasizing that even minor misunderstandings could escalate quickly when prejudice and assumptions were involved. The girl's experience became more than a personal incident. It became part of a larger conversation about fairness and equality. As days passed, the girl reflected on the incident and how it had changed her perspective. She realized that fear and anxiety could be met with calmness and honesty, and that by staying composed, she had not only protected herself but also inspired others. She thought about her brother, who had watched her courage and learned an important lesson about resilience and patience. Even in frightening circumstances, she had demonstrated that integrity and poise could prevail. The public support continued to grow. Social media users praised the girl for her courage, parents shared her story to educate their children, and even some airline employees expressed concern over the initial response. The girl began to feel a sense of empowerment, understanding that her experience could help others recognize and challenge unfair treatment. She realized that one moment of fear could become a story of strength, hope, and change. Despite the attention, her parents made sure she had time to rest and recover. They limited her exposure to news and social media, ensuring that she could process her emotions privately. The girl spent quiet evenings reflecting on the journey, writing in a journal about what had happened and considering how she could use her experience to support others. She wrote about the fear, the frustration, the moments of courage, and the eventual relief. Writing helped her make sense of everything and reminded her that her story had power. Her brother also began to understand the situation better. He asked questions about why the flight attendant had acted the way she did, and why people had assumed something was wrong. The girl explained in simple terms about assumptions and bias, helping him understand that the incident was not about them personally, but about unfair treatment that many people face. She emphasized that they had handled it correctly, and that staying calm had been the right choice. As the family prepared to return home after their trip, they felt a mixture of relief and pride. The incident had been frightening, but it had also shown them their own strength and the strength of their community. The girl understood that while fear and misunderstanding could create challenges, honesty, patience, and courage could turn even the most difficult moments into lessons for growth. Before leaving the airport, the girl noticed the quiet support of some passengers who had been on the original flight. They offered smiles, nods, and encouraging words. She realized that small gestures of acknowledgement could mean a lot, especially in moments of injustice. It reminded her that empathy and kindness were powerful tools, capable of turning a tense situation into one where people could recognize fairness and humanity. Even after returning home, the story continued to spark conversations. Friends, classmates, and neighbors expressed concern and admiration for the girl's composure. Community leaders invited her family to meetings to discuss ways to prevent similar incidents. The airline, under pressure from public opinion, promised additional training for staff on bias, communication, and HA. The airport had calmed down since the initial incident, but the memory of it still lingered in the girl's mind. She had been able to finish her flight with her brother safely, and her parents had reassured her over and over that they would handle everything. Yet she could not shake the sense that the situation was not yet fully resolved. The attention on social media, the discussions in the news, and the reactions from people who had witnessed the event kept the incident alive in her thoughts. It was then that the police chief of the airport personally arrived at the terminal. Word spread quickly that he had come to see what had happened. The chief was known for being fair and professional, someone who listened to all sides before making decisions. He walked through the terminal with a calm authority, observing the scene with careful attention. Officers who had been on duty greeted him respectfully, and even the flight attendant seemed slightly taken aback by the seriousness of his presence. The girl and her family were waiting near the gate. When they saw the chief approach, they stood quietly, unsure of what to expect. The chief smiled gently at the girl, nodding in acknowledgement. He spoke first to her parents, introducing himself and explaining that he was there to understand the situation fully, not to assign blame immediately. The family felt a small sense of relief. It was reassuring to know that someone with authority and experience was taking the time to listen. The chief began by reviewing the reports filed by the officers. He read through the statements about what the flight attendant had claimed and what the officers had observed. He asked questions carefully, making sure to capture every detail. The girl's father explained what had happened from their perspective, speaking clearly and calmly. He described how the girl had remained polite and composed even under stress, and how the flight attendant had seemed unnecessarily suspicious. After speaking with the parents, the chief turned to the girl and her brother. He knelt slightly so that he was at eye level with them, smiling reassuringly. "I want to hear your side," he said. "Can you tell me what happened in your own words?" The girl took a deep breath and explained everything patiently, from the moment they boarded the plane, to the questions she had asked politely, to the confusion over the seating and the flight attendant's sudden decision to call the police. Her brother added a few details, speaking softly but clearly about how scared he had felt. The chief listened carefully, nodding as they spoke. He asked follow-up questions to clarify small points, not in a way that felt intimidating but as if he genuinely wanted to understand. The girl appreciated the way he treated them with respect and seriousness. It was different from the flight attendant's behavior, which had felt accusatory and unfair. She realized that this officer was someone who cared about truth and fairness. Once he had spoken with the family, the chief requested to see all the footage from the terminal, the boarding area, and the plane. Officers quickly gathered the recordings, and together they watched the events unfold. The girl sat quietly, holding her brother's hand, as the chief observed every detail: the polite questions, the way she had helped her brother, the reactions of other passengers, and the insistence of the flight attendant. As the footage played, the chief's expression grew more serious. He nodded slowly, noting the details, and then paused to ask questions about specific moments. "Here, why did the attendant react this way?" he asked one of the officers. "Was there any threat or unusual behavior?" The officers shook their heads. The girl's heart lifted slightly, knowing that the evidence clearly supported her story. After reviewing the footage, the chief turned to the flight attendant. "Can you explain why you called the police?" he asked calmly but firmly. The attendant's voice faltered slightly as she tried to justify her actions, explaining that she had perceived something suspicious. The chief listened patiently but did not interrupt her. He then asked her to describe her training and protocols for handling unusual behavior. It became clear that her actions had been influenced by assumptions rather than facts. The chief then addressed the officers again, asking them to make notes for an internal report. "We need to ensure that situations like this are handled with care in the future," he said. "We cannot let assumptions lead to unnecessary fear or distress, especially for young travelers." His words were deliberate and clear, emphasizing the importance of fairness, accountability, and professionalism. Turning back to the girl and her family, the chief offered a sincere apology. "I am very sorry for what you experienced," he said. "No one should be treated as a threat when they have done nothing wrong. You handled the situation with courage and honesty, and that deserves recognition." The girl felt a wave of relief and validation. After days of fear and tension, someone in authority had recognized her composure and her innocence. The chief continued, explaining that there would be an internal investigation into the flight attendant's behavior. He stressed that the purpose was not to humiliate or punish unnecessarily, but to ensure that procedures were followed correctly and that training was improved to prevent similar incidents. The girl's parents felt reassured. They could see that the chief's approach was measured, fair, and genuinely concerned with justice. Passengers who had witnessed the event were still nearby, curious about the chief's involvement. Some whispered to one another, noticing the serious attention being given to the situation. The girl felt a mixture of pride and relief. She realized that the chief's actions not only addressed her case, but also sent a message to others that fairness and accountability were important. Her calm and honest behavior had been recognized, and that recognition mattered. The chief also took time to speak with airline management. He highlighted the need for improved staff training, particularly regarding interactions with young passengers, and recognizing how bias can influence judgment. The airline representatives listened attentively, acknowledging that changes were necessary. The girl overheard parts of the conversation and felt reassured that the lessons from this incident might prevent similar situations in the future. Once the formal review was complete, the chief spoke publicly to passengers and officers gathered near the gate. He reiterated the importance of calm, respectful, and fair treatment for everyone. "We must be careful not to let assumptions or fear guide our actions," he said. "Every passenger deserves to be treated with dignity. This incident is a reminder that we must uphold these standards at all times." His voice carried authority, but also empathy, and many passengers nodded in agreement. The girl's parents thanked the chief personally. They expressed gratitude not only for addressing their daughter's situation, but also for showing integrity and leadership. The girl felt a deep sense of respect for him. He had arrived not just to investigate, but to ensure that truth and fairness prevailed. It was a stark contrast to the earlier fear she had felt, and it reinforced her understanding of how important it is for people in positions of authority to act with integrity. After the chief left, the family noticed a change in the atmosphere around them. Passengers who had witnessed the incident were more relaxed, some offering words of support and smiles. The girl realized that the chief's presence had not only helped her and her family, but had also reassured others that fairness mattered. It was a moment of closure, of recognition, and of hope that things could be better in the future. In the following days, the girl reflected on the chief's actions. She understood that his calm, measured approach and commitment to truth had made a real difference. It was not just about resolving a single incident, but about showing others the importance of fairness, empathy, and accountability. She felt inspired, realizing that even in difficult situations, there were people willing to listen, to act fairly, and to make a positive impact. The airline later issued a formal apology, acknowledging the inappropriate actions of the flight attendant and promising corrective measures. They emphasized their commitment to training staff better and ensuring that all passengers are treated with respect and dignity. The girl felt a sense of relief that the situation had reached this point. She knew that her experience had helped bring attention to issues of fairness and bias, and that change was possible. Meanwhile, media outlets covered the story of the chief's intervention. The coverage highlighted the importance of strong ethical leadership in law enforcement and public safety. Interviews with the girl's family emphasized her courage, patience, and composure during the ordeal. The story resonated with many viewers, sparking discussions about fairness, empathy, and the responsibility of those in positions of authority. Even with all the attention, the girl tried to maintain a sense of normalcy. She focused on spending time with her brother and parents, enjoying the trip she had been looking forward to. Yet she carried with her the lessons she had learned, that staying calm and honest can make a difference, that courage can take many forms, and that integrity and fairness are values worth standing up for. By the time their journey came to an end, the girl felt stronger and more confident than she had before. She realized that fear and misunderstanding could be transformed into moments of growth and empowerment. She also understood that leadership, like the chief had shown, could inspire others to act with fairness and empathy. This understanding, after the airport incident was resolved, the girl and her family finally felt a sense of relief. The police chief had made it clear that she had done nothing wrong. The airline had issued an apology, and the flight attendant's actions were under review. Despite the attention from the media and social networks, there was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that fairness had prevailed. Yet the experience had left a mark on all of them, especially the girl. As they settled back into their normal routine, the girl began to reflect on what had happened. The fear and anxiety she had felt at the airport were still fresh in her memory, but they were now mixed with feelings of pride and empowerment. She realized that she had handled herself with patience, honesty, and calmness even under immense pressure. This gave her a new understanding of her own strength. She had learned that courage is not always loud or dramatic. It can also be quiet, steady, and composed. Her brother, who had clung to her during the ordeal, seemed to share in her newfound sense of empowerment. He asked questions about what had happened, why people sometimes make assumptions, and how he could handle difficult situations in the future. She explained to him that not everyone sees things the same way, and that people sometimes act based on fear or prejudice rather than facts. She emphasized that what mattered most was how they responded, with honesty, respect, and calmness. The family continued to receive messages of support from friends, distant relatives, and even strangers who had seen the videos online. Many people shared similar stories of being judged unfairly or of witnessing bias in public spaces. The girl's parents used these messages to help her understand that her experience, while difficult, was also part of a larger conversation about fairness and justice. They reminded her that by staying calm and honest, she had already inspired others and shown an example of integrity. The airline followed through on its promise to improve training for staff. They implemented programs focused on recognizing bias, handling unusual situations calmly, and treating all passengers with dignity. The flight attendant involved in the incident received additional training and was reminded of the importance of fairness and professionalism. The family felt reassured that steps were being taken to prevent similar situations in the future. Knowing that her story had contributed to positive change gave the girl a sense of accomplishment and hope. The girl also began to notice changes in her own confidence and self-awareness. She found herself speaking up more in school and in social situations, knowing that she could face challenges with poise. The experience had taught her to trust her own judgment and to respond thoughtfully, even when others acted unfairly. She felt proud that she had maintained composure in a tense moment, protected her brother, and remained true to herself throughout the ordeal. In the weeks that followed, the girl and her family shared their story publicly in a careful and meaningful way. They spoke at community events discussing the incident and emphasizing lessons about fairness, empathy, and courage. She spoke about how staying calm, being honest, and responding with integrity had helped her through a frightening situation. People of all ages listened, inspired by her honesty and resilience. Many students approached her afterward, thanking her for sharing her experience and saying it encouraged them to handle challenges with similar composure. The experience also deepened the family's understanding of social responsibility. They realized that moments of injustice, even when directed at a single person, could become opportunities for awareness, change, and education. They worked with local organizations to raise awareness about racial profiling and the importance of treating every individual with fairness and respect. The girl took pride in knowing that her experience had sparked meaningful conversations in her community. Despite the public attention, the girl's family made sure she had time to rest and process everything privately. They limited her exposure to social media and news coverage, recognizing that too much attention could be overwhelming. The girl spent time writing in a journal, reflecting on her emotions, the lessons she had learned, and the people who had supported her. Writing became a way to make sense of the experience, helping her focus on the positive outcomes and the growth that had come from a frightening situation. Her brother continued to look up to her, asking for advice on how to handle unfair treatment or difficult moments. She guided him patiently, sharing what she had learned, that honesty, calmness, and courage could protect them, even when circumstances felt beyond their control. She taught him that fairness might not always happen immediately, but integrity and composure were always within their control. The girl's story continued to resonate in her community. Teachers used it as an example in classrooms to discuss empathy and fairness. Students discussed the importance of standing up for others and responding thoughtfully under pressure. Community leaders praised her for turning a frightening personal experience into a meaningful lesson for many. The family felt proud of her growth and the positive influence she was having on others. As time passed, the girl began to feel a sense of closure. The initial fear and confusion had given way to understanding, pride, and purpose. She no longer relived the incident with anxiety, but instead viewed it as a turning point in her life. A moment when she had demonstrated courage, patience, and integrity. She understood that even in situations where unfairness seemed overwhelming, one could respond with composure and honesty to make a difference. The airline also recognized the importance of the incident and used it as a learning opportunity. They organized workshops for staff on bias recognition and communication skills, emphasizing that every passenger deserved respect and dignity. The family saw that their advocacy had contributed to real change, reinforcing the lesson that speaking out and responding appropriately could improve the system for others. The girl continued to reflect on the kindness of strangers who had supported her during the ordeal. Passengers who had witnessed the incident had reached out, expressing encouragement and solidarity. The girl realized that even small gestures of recognition and empathy could make a huge difference. She learned that human connection and support were powerful tools in overcoming fear and injustice. Her parents encouraged her to share her story with younger students in schools, helping them understand the importance of integrity, fairness, and composure. She spoke about how fear can be met with calmness, how assumptions can be challenged with honesty, and how courage often comes in quiet, steady ways. The students listened attentively, inspired by her experience and the lessons she shared. The girl also began to feel empowered to help others facing similar situations. She volunteered at local organizations, supporting programs that encourage young people to stand up for fairness and treat others with respect. She understood that one person's actions could influence many, and that even a single incident, when handled thoughtfully, could lead to greater awareness and positive change. Throughout this time, the girl's relationship with her brother grew stronger. He had seen her respond to fear with composure and had learned valuable lessons about courage, empathy, and integrity. They spent more time together, talking about experiences at school, helping each other with challenges, and sharing moments of joy. The airport incident, though frightening, had ultimately strengthened their bond and taught them lessons they would carry for a lifetime. The girl also noticed a change within herself. She became more confident in public spaces, more aware of how to respond to challenging situations, and more determined to advocate for fairness. She understood that standing up calmly and honestly, even when faced with unfair treatment, could inspire others and create change. Her experience had transformed fear into empowerment, anxiety into confidence, and frustration into purpose. The story of the incident continued to circulate in her community and online, not as a tale of fear, but as an example of resilience, courage, and the importance of fairness. People admired her ability to remain calm and composed, her honesty in the face of accusations, and her willingness to share her experience to educate others. The girl realized that her actions had a lasting impact, far beyond the initial moment of fear in the airport. Even months later, the girl and her family could reflect on the incident with a sense of pride. What had begun as a frightening, unjust experience had turned into a story of courage, empathy, and positive change. The flight attendant had been held accountable, the airline had improved its training, the community had engaged in meaningful discussion, and the girl had emerged stronger and more confident. In the end, the girl understood a valuable truth. Difficult moments, even those caused by fear or prejudice, could become opportunities for growth, learning, and positive influence. She knew that she had the ability to respond thoughtfully, to protect those she cared about, and to inspire others through her calm, honest, and courageous actions. She felt empowered, not just by what she had endured, but by how she had turned it into a lesson for herself and her community. As she prepared for her next journey, whether a trip or a challenge in everyday life, the girl carried with her the lessons of the airport incident. She had learned that fear could be met with courage, unfairness could be met with honesty, and uncertainty could be met with calmness. She